Hello everybody, my name is Aaron, and today we are going to talk about CSS display properties. And during this week or so that I've been actually studying it or looking at it and using it, it's been a challenge for me, and hopefully this will help you in some ways. I know that especially this week when we are working on the Franklin 5 weather websites, it definitely came into effect using sometimes the inline display property, which we'll talk about, and came up with questions about the none display property. So hopefully those of us who are still confused, which I am a little bit, this helps you to at least get a better understanding of what the display properties do for us. What is a display property? Well, with HTML container elements such as articles, aside, header, main, footer, and li tags, these display properties determine if, where, and how the container element is displayed. Without the display property, your web page would be a bunch of elements that are displayed haphazardly. All HTML elements that contain content visible to the viewer on a web page have a default display property. And like I said, some of the basic ones that we'll be talking about today in the display properties are the none, the block, inline, and inline block. The none value property. The CSS display none declaration undisplays the content. For example, if you have a div and it has display none and then the word hello, what you'll see is that that word hello will not be published when you look at the page. On the other hand, it can be seen in the web page source code with a browser's view source menu item, but it won't be rendered on the page. Not even the space it would otherwise occupy is rendered. As far as the rendered page is concerned, that div with the hello in it doesn't exist. The block value property. The CSS display block declaration displays the content after a line break and ends with a line break. Unless a CSS declaration tells it otherwise, the div extends horizontally the entire width of the container from left margin to right margin. And here we have the example of the display block, and this is how the code renders. As you can see, you've got your border with the word hello in it. Many container elements are display block by default. Examples are divs, h tags, p and pre tags. The inline value property. The CSS display inline declaration displays content within the line. There's no line break before or after unless it happens in the natural flow of the content. For example, in this sentence, he shouted hello 3 times. With putting the inline in the div, we can see that the code renders like this. He shouted hello 3 times. Because it's inline, it doesn't affect it at all. Everything just runs together, except if that was at the very end of your container. Every HTML element has a default display value depending on what type of element it is. The default display value for the most elements is block or inline. The inline block value property. The CSS display inline block declaration is like a display inline declaration, except it can have a width and height like a display block declaration can. So in our example, he shouted hello very loud 3 times. With having that div in as an inline block, the code's going to render it more like this. He shouted hello very loud 3 times. But unlike the block where it would have pushed he shouted and 3 times to different lines, it's able to stay in line and block that little section out for us. This property is not a default, and you have to assign this property to your HTML elements in order to display the inline block. The example that I found to help demonstrate this was a suitcase example. Especially like when you're taking a trip, you just don't throw your clothes in there and hope everything gets there and it's not wrinkled and stuff. So obviously when you have a suitcase, you take the time to organize it and pack it to get the most out of what you can in the space that you have. So in our suitcase today, we're going to have delicates, t-shirts, socks, and underwear. Here on the left, we have our HTML suitcase. And then on the right, as a picture, we we dictate the first one, which is our display block, which is our delicate items. And if you notice this, the delicate item is the only thing on this level. There's nothing else. Even though it doesn't take up the whole suitcase, it's still the only item that you can really see. And if you look hard enough, you'll notice that it has a margin around it just to protect it, to keep other items from moving up into it. So it takes up that whole level. And then next we have the neatly packed t-shirts, which is our inline block items. And here we can see the top and the bottom rows of the t-shirts with 4 shirts in each row. It allows us to fit the most items in a row. It lines up the items next to one another, and they can also be displayed with inline elements. I mean, just imagine if you had to have each t-shirt as a block. You would have one stack in the middle of your suitcase, 8 t-shirts high, and you would be wasting all that space on the left and right sides. Last, we have the socks that fill in the gaps, or our inline. The inline element will spill over to the next line if it exceeds the width of the container. And this is kind of the philosophy of the socks, right? They don't all have to be in one single place. You can stick some in one row like we saw, and you can stick some in the other row. For example, we have the middle row with the 4 t-shirts with socks at the end, and then the bottom row we have the socks to the begin, and then we have 4 t-shirts afterwards. This inline element allows you to fill in the gaps, and it just keeps going, and when it runs out on one, it falls down to the next level. So the socks are an inline element, which means they will fill the gaps around the t-shirts, which are inline block elements. As we can tell, though, with our suitcase, if we just threw everything in there, it would just be all garbled up in whichever way. But with our CSS suitcase, our CSS sheet, we're able to dictate how our suitcase is packed, and it's going to be a nice, neat, and organized manner, allowing us to effectively get everything that we need in the suitcase, our socks, our t-shirts, and even our delicate shirts, in a way to where nothing gets messed up, nothing's overridden, and nothing gets ruined. As a reminder, just to follow up on some of these, the CSS display property is one of the most powerful and useful properties in all the CSS. Changing the display type of an element only changes the display behavior of an element, not the type of element it is. The value none for the display property does not create an invisible box. It creates no box at all. It just doesn't show that code that you list as none. I also found a couple of links. One was a more extensive link. The developer Mozilla link is a more extensive list of all the properties that there are. And then the W3 school list is more of a list which shows some of the common block and inline elements. So you can go there and see, oh, these automatically have a block default, and these automatically are inline default, which will help you understand why things are moving around on your page as these things happen. So if you're like me, and this week you were trying to figure out how a picture went one way or another way, or trying to figure out how to space things, hopefully this will help you be able to get the look that you're striving for, as well as keep the standards, whether it's a large, medium, or small viewing field that that person has. So again, I hope we all have a good week, and that we're able to take away just a little bit from this and learn something. Please ask questions if you have any. It'll only help us both learn. So I appreciate your time, and you have a good day. Thank you.